Lady Cook 31 requires post in school. Experience in school with 40 boarders. Disengaged. Salary £65. Miss I. Wilkins 21 Thirlmere Road, Streatham, South West London 16. As requested, the advertisement appeared in the Morning Post. Irene May Wilkins, the 31-year-old unmarried daughter of a deceased London barrister, was desperately seeking a new job and sent a letter, along with a postal order for 3 shillings, to the advertising manager of the Fleet Street-based newspaper, asking for the notice to be placed in the Thursday morning edition, 22nd of December 1921. It seemed her appeal met with immediate success, as shortly before lunchtime a telegram arrived at the house in Streatham. It read, "Morning Post, come immediately, 4:30 train, Waterloo, Bournemouth Central. Car will meet train, expense no object, urgent, Wood, Beach House." Irene immediately replied by telegram to Mr. Wood at Beach House, accepting the offer, and at 3:30 she boarded a bus to Waterloo. The southbound express had barely pulled out of the station when the telegram was returned to Irene's home, marked address unknown. In Bournemouth, the telegram boy, finding no beach house listed, had consulted with others at the office and believed the sender may have made a mistake, and was instead told to deliver it to Beechhurst on Beechwood Avenue in the town. At that address lived a Mr. Sutton, an invalid in the care of a nurse. The nurse answered the door after the postboy had dropped the telegram onto the doormat and cycled away. He quickly returned it to the sorting office, explaining that there was nobody by the name of Wood living at the house, and it was immediately returned to sender. Darkness had fallen when Irene Wilkins, carrying her small attaché case, arrived at Bournemouth Central Railway Station at 7:03. The train was almost 20 minutes late, and as she exited the station she found a car along with a smartly dressed driver waiting to collect her. Handing the chauffeur her case, he quickly stored it into the boot, and moments later the car pulled away from the station concourse and headed, Irene assumed, towards her new post at Beach House. Soon after dawn on the following morning, Charles Nicklin, an elderly labourer out walking at a place known as 15-acre Meadow on the outskirts of Boscombe, became aware of 2 cows nosing at a bundle lying in a field behind a gorse bush. This unusual sight caused him to take a closer look, and he discovered the dead body of a woman, her clothes rearranged and her face a mass of blood and bruises. Police officers were soon at the scene under the command of Superintendent Shadrach Garrett, and as detectives began their investigations, they already had a possible name for the victim. Irene's family had debated the return telegram on the previous evening and decided that first thing on the following morning they would report their concerns to the police. Within the hour, the name of Irene Wilkins came to the knowledge of Bournemouth detectives, and as there was nothing on her person to confirm identification other than a watch with the initials IMW on the back, notification was sent back to London, and her brother, Noel Wilkins, hurried to the scene where he had the painful duty of identifying the body of his sister. Although Irene was found lying on her back with her dress pulled up, Dr. Harold Summons was able to inform detectives she had not been raped, having seemingly fought off her attacker with an umbrella. A blunt instrument, possibly a spanner, had caused the injuries to her head, and she had also been punched in the face. Time of death was fixed at some time before 8:20. Prior to this it had been raining and the top of her clothing was dry, while the parts in contact with the ground were soaked from the wet grass. The police were also fortunate that the body had been found so early in the morning. The road beside the field was well used by locals, and at a spot close to where the body was found were footprints and signs that a struggle had taken place there, along with a deep set of tyre tracks in the muddy lane, which suggested the car had parked up for a time. Checks found that a car with Dunlop Magnum tyres had made the tracks. News of the discovery of the body and the tyre tracks was reported in the local newspapers. One man reading it was Frank Humphreys, who had returned to Bournemouth on the same train as Irene Wilkins. On Christmas morning, while neighbours were unwrapping presents, he was at Bournemouth main police station, where he was able to tell detectives he had seen a girl matching Irene's description carrying a small suitcase exit the station in front of him, and that she had climbed into a chauffeur-driven grey car. Enquiries were made at Bournemouth Central Station. Edward Nash, a signalman, recalled the chauffeur, as he had been questioned by him about the arrival of the Waterloo train. Nash had told him it was running late, but that he was waiting on the wrong platform and directed him to the correct one. Officers were sent to question all chauffeurs in the area, one of whom was 36-year-old Thomas Henry Allaway, employed by a businessman, Arthur Sutton, whose premises were on Clifton Road, Southbourne. Sutton was the father of a man living at Beechhurst, where the telegram sent to London had been posted. Allaway drove a grey-green 1914 model 4-seater Mercedes car, and a check of the tyres found it was fitted with 3 Dunlop Magnums and 1 Michelin tyre. However, from the position of the tyre imprints, it was clear the Michelin was on the wrong wheel to match the tracks in the field. Allaway denied changing any tyres recently, and when officers spoke to employers, they learned the Mercedes was locked up in a garage on Haviland Road at the time Irene Wilkins was seen climbing into the car. And as Sutton had the only key, this supported Allaway's alibi that he was drinking in the Salisbury Hotel. Detectives focused on the telegram sent to Streatham and interviewed Alice Waters, the postal clerk at Bournemouth. She had spoken to the man sending it and had questioned him about the address. She said she would probably recognise him if she saw him again and heard him speak. Garrett also learned that over the previous week 2 other telegrams had been returned, and examining them he noticed they appeared to be written in the same handwriting, and each contained spelling mistakes. Another clerk, Lillian Diplock, based at Boscombe, from where one telegram had been sent, also recalled the sender and felt she too would recognise him again. Detectives then heard from a nurse who had replied to a telegram and had also made a trip to Bournemouth on the 4:30 Waterloo train, but had missed her stop, and by the time she reached the station there had been no car waiting when she arrived, and the taxi she summoned was unable to direct her to the address on the telegram. Unaware of the time of her lucky escape, she cursed and returned home. On the 31st of December, as Irene Wilkins was laid to rest in Streatham Cemetery, her attaché case was found in a field at Branksome near Poole. And 5 days later, on the 4th of January 1922, 2 weeks after the murder, Frank Humphries again spotted the car he had seen Irene getting into. Now aware of its significance in relation to the murder inquiry, he noted the registration number LK7405 and reported it to the police. However, possibly due to the amount of inquiries being undertaken, over 22,000 papers were eventually received, officers failed to follow up this report. A month later, Lillian Diplock recognised a uniformed man sending a telegram as the same man detectives wished to interview. She told a fellow clerk and hurried after him, but by the time they got to the door, the man had vanished. A few weeks later she heard the voice again. This time she managed to see the man standing beside a grey-green Mercedes. She took its number, LK7405, and reported it to the police. Again, officers failed to follow up the lead. Days later, the chauffeur was seen again by Miss Diplock. Again, she told one of her fellow workers, who followed the man to an address in Portman Mews. It was the home of Mr. and Mrs. Sutton, and as before, the police took no action. In April, Allaway, perhaps aware that the search for the chauffeur, which was constantly in the local papers, was going to lead back to him, ended his employment with Mr. Sutton, but not before taking his chequebook with him. Forging a number of cheques, he obtained over £20, which he used to take his wife and young daughter away from Hampshire. Eventually, detectives sifting through the evidence came across the witness statements relating to the Mercedes and decided it was time they interviewed Allaway. Finding he had fled, they launched a nationwide hunt for him, which eventually led detectives to Reading. Discovering where Allaway was living, a constable was posted to keep watch. On the evening of 28th of April, Thomas Allaway was spotted as he approached the house, but seeing a policeman, he turned on his heels. The bobby was no longer a young man, and the combination of his age and portly frame meant that the suspect was soon able to outrun him. Fortunately for the officer, a member of public was alerted to the shouts to stop that man and stuck out a foot as Allaway passed, sending him sprawling to the ground. Before he could recover to his feet, the officer was able to put his ample frame on the prisoner and hold him until assistance could be given. Taken into custody, Allaway was found to have a number of betting slips in his pocket, the handwriting on which matched that on the telegram sent to Irene Wilkins. The tyres on Sutton's Mercedes were closely examined again. The Magnum, which had been enough to discount the car from the initial inquiries, was found to be more worn than the others on the car, and a check on the spur found it was a Dunlop Magnum matching the others on the car, and more importantly, matching the telltale marks left at the scene of the murder. A witness was then found who had seen Allaway changing the tyre after the murder had taken place. In order to break Allaway's alibi, detectives needed to show that despite Sutton's statement that the car had been in the garage at 7 p.m. on that Friday night, that it had been in the possession of Allaway. A search of his old lodgings unearthed a key, and when checked it fitted Sutton's lock-up garage. Allaway later admitted he had copied the key, allowing him to take the car whenever he chose. Such was the evidence that when Allaway stood trial before Mr Justice Avery at Winchester Assizes in July, the prosecution had a strong case. Both postal clerks picked Allaway out of an identity parade, and his handwriting, found on the betting slips written after the murder and on bundles of letters he had written to his wife while serving in the Royal Army Service Corps during the Great War, matched that on the telegrams. Outlining their case, prosecution counsel Thomas Inskip KC said that Allaway had lured his victims to Bournemouth for the purpose of carrying out a sexual assault. Witnesses had been found who had seen the prisoner buying a copy of the Morning Post on the day Irene Wilkins' advertisement appeared. The postal clerk identified Allaway as the man who had sent the telegram, and Frank Humphreys had testified he was the man driving the car which had met Irene Wilkins at the station. Most damning was the handwriting on the 3 telegrams, which experts proved had been written and sent by the prisoner. All the telegrams contained spelling mistakes, the same mistakes Allaway made when he was asked to write out some words they contained. Defence counsel Mr A.C. Fox-Davies told the court that the accused had an alibi. He said that Allaway had finished his duties in the early evening and had gone out at 6:30, spending the night in a public house, and, as he did not have access to the locked garage, he could not have possibly taken the car. The alibi was effectively shattered when the duplicate key was produced, as was a witness who claimed to have seen the prisoner at the Haviland Road garage 3 times on the night of the murder, and that the car had been taken out of the garage before 7 p.m. Allaway performed badly in the witness box. He stumbled through some of the questions put to him, and when he was eventually returned to the dock, there were few in the court who believed that any other verdict than guilty as charged would be returned. On the 5th day of the trial, 7th of July, the jury heard Mr Justice Avery sum up for over 2 hours before being invited to consider their verdict. Exactly 1 hour after retiring, they returned to find Allaway guilty of murder. A press photographer concealing a camera was able to record the moment the black cap was draped on the judge's wig, and the prisoner stood emotionless in the dock as he was condemned to death. An appeal, which heard evidence that new witnesses had come forward to support Allaway's alibi, was quickly dismissed, and he was returned to Winchester to await the hangman. The execution was fixed for Saturday the 19th of August 1922, and long-serving executioner John Ellis of Rochdale and his assistant Edward Taylor were engaged. After pleading his innocence since his arrest, Allaway finally confessed his guilt 20 minutes before he was due to walk to the gallows, much to the disdain of Governor Harding, who refused to shake the prisoner's hand. Due to a recent fire that destroyed the chapel, no bell was tolled as the procession made its way to the scaffold. Ellis placed the noose around his neck and then pulled the lever. It was not a smooth execution. As Allaway's body fell through the trap, it lurched to one side, slamming into the edge of the drop and shifting the position of the knot. Allaway died of asphyxiation and not of a broken neck. Was death instantaneous? Asked the prison governor as he filled out the official LPC4 sheet recording details of the execution. Shaking his head, Ellis replied, "Well, almost." The prison record book of execution had not noted that a similar incident had occurred on Ellis's last visit to Winchester 5 years earlier, when Leo O'Donnell had been hanged on the same scaffold. But with this occurrence, prison staff who had been present at both made written statements. An inquiry was launched, and rather than lay any blame on the vastly experienced hangman, who had carried out almost 200 executions by this time, it was found that the trapdoors at Winchester were much smaller than at other jails, and this was partly responsible. In both cases, the prisoner had fainted as the lever was pulled, and instead of falling true had swooned to the side, striking the edge of the pit as they fell. The scaffold was therefore dismantled and a new gallows constructed at Winchester at the end of D Wing, where it stayed in use until the last hanging at Winchester in December 1963. My name is Steve Fielding. Thank you for watching and listening to another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Hangman's Record, and also check out my website, thehangmansrecord.com, where you can find out more about my books and order copies of The Hangman's Record at a special subscriber price. Please use the comments below to discuss this case and for suggestions for any other episodes in the Tales from the Hangman's Record series.